Woods Wake, Chapter 15. There was something about having the house to herself and Haggerty that Kate enjoyed. When her father and brother drove off that afternoon, she had washed the lunch dishes. She sat at the window with the cat on her lap, watching sparrows feed on the crusts of bread that she had thrown out on the frozen ground. Mrs. Colstead was out on the back porch finishing up the laundry. There was no heat on the porch, but the glass windows were steamed up from the water in the washtubs. Kate watched her feed the last sheet through the wringer. Then Mrs. Colstead threw her coat and carried a basket of damp clothes outside, working quickly, the clothespin bag sliding along the line ahead of her, a clothespin in her mouth. As soon as the last clothes were hung and the water emptied, she'd be off in her Model T. The wind whipped at the sheets on the line, and Kate knew that they would be stiff as a board when she brought them in later. She might even leave them out on the line all night if it didn't snow. Mrs. Colstead had come late today. Kate had lived here in the Red River Valley her whole 15 years. She'd been to Bismarck twice, once each to Chicago and Minneapolis, and she wasn't sure where she would prefer to live. Not Chicago, she was certain, with canyons for streets dwarfed as she had felt by the tall buildings. Possibly Minneapolis. The flat, fertile fields of eastern North Dakota were home to her, however, the roads coming together at perfect right angles. But life out here in the country could get lonesome at times. They could see no other house from the front stoop, only road to the right until it disappeared behind the Finley's walnut grove, and road to the left where it passed potato fields and some distance away a neighbor's barn. But everyone knew that if someone fell off a silo or got a foot caught in a mower or woke with a muscle spasm or got the chicken pox, you didn't have to go all the way into Grand Forks because Doc Sterling lived just a couple miles up the road, and that's the way her father wanted it. She'd worked some more on the bridge that morning and somehow managed to undo all the progress she had made the day before. She'd given up in tears and put it back on the shelf. But now, with a cup of sassafras tea and a warm half-cat, half-kitten on her lap, she felt she might tackle it again, as if she had the patience. What puzzled her most about the last 3.5 years was how easily it seemed Jesse had got over it. The crash. He'd only been 7 when it happened, and you'd think it would have been worst of all for him. And sometimes it seemed to be, because Kate would find him lying face down with his head on his arms, crying for missing his mother. But then, amazingly, it was over. He would put on a record or call up a friend, but for her, there were reminders everywhere. Her mother's recipe box on the kitchen counter, her wedding picture in the hall. Still, maybe Kate could be like Jessie, given time. Maybe she could just have a long, good cry, say her goodbye, and get on with things. The ringing of the telephone, 2 long rings, 1 short, caused her to jump. But Haggerty only extended his back in a long, slow, luxurious stretch, extending, then retracting his paws in pleasure. "Sorry," Kate told him as she picked him up and set him back down on the warmth of her cushion and finally picked up the phone. "It's Mrs. Downs, Kate," came a voice in obvious pain. "Is your father there?" "I'm afraid not. He's gone into town, and I doubt he'll be back before 8 this evening. Is there anything I can do?" "Oh dear, I've done the stupidest thing. A pot holder caught fire on my stove, and I tried to get it to the sink, and the flames went right over my arm, and it hurts like the dickens." There were a few things Kate advised, with confidence, having heard her father recite them so often. If she didn't know how to answer, she asked a patient to call Mrs. Everett, hoping that Dad's nurse would be home. Mrs. Downs answered her next question before she asked. "I tried calling Mrs. Everett, but she's not there. Do I wash the burn before I treat it, or what?" "When you burn yourself in direct flames, Mrs. Downs, the heat usually kills the germs, so all you have to do is bandage it. Do you have any Vaseline?" "Yes." "Smear some over the burn. Then freshly iron a clean handkerchief and wrap it around your hand." "I can't just get a handkerchief from the drawer?" "It should really be sterilized, and it will be if you iron it," Kate explained. "Oh, you're a dear. Thank you so much." Kate liked to feel needed, and decided to bake something that they could enjoy that night after Roosevelt spoke, or later while they listened to the game. A yellow sheet cake with brown sugar icing, maybe. Mrs. Colmsted came in at last around 5, her cheeks and hands red. Kate waited for her usual comment about how much faster she could if do the wash if they had an easy spin dryer like Mrs. Saunders had in town, even though she knew that meant a house wired for electricity. But this time Mrs. Colsted only said in her usual dire manner, "Well, that's that for another week. Can't wait for warm weather to get here, when you can hang up clothes before they half freeze on you." "That will be a treat," Kate said. "Have a good week, Mrs. Colsted." Kate set to mixing the eggs and shortening and turned on the radio to KFJM. "Zero visibility," an announcer was saying. Kate glanced out the window. Well, whatever place that forecast was for, it certainly wasn't here. In the gathering dusk, she could still see the thermometer outside the kitchen window. It had dropped only 2 degrees since this morning, and everything beyond the window had fallen. Limbs in the backyard, the shed, and the barn were clearly visible. She changed the station to WDAY. Later, they would broadcast the National Barn Dance, starring Eddie Peabody, and after the president's speech, the NBC Orchestra. But Kate would be tuned to Bismarck by then for the game. Right now, there was a program called Defense of America, and Kate turned the radio off. At 6:45, the phone rang again, and Kate lifted the receiver. "Any calls, Kate?" her father asked. "One. Mrs. Downs burned her hand. I told her you wouldn't be back until later and how she should bandage it." "Severe burn?" "Flames from a burning pot holder. I told her she didn't need to wash it." "Good. I just picked up Jesse, and we're over at Dryberg's farm. Mr. Dryberg's got an infection on his toe and I treated last month, and it's not looking too good. I'm going to have to work on that. And Mrs. Dryberg's giving us supper. So you can go on and eat, and we'll be home when we get there." "You won't miss the president's speech, will you?" Kate said. "No, we'll be back by then. The way Jesse's breathing down my neck, wants to be home in time to listen to the game. But if I'm not there to hear Mr. Roosevelt, you listen for me, okay?" "All right," Kate agreed. "It's just you and me for supper, Haggerty," she said to the cat as she hung up the phone. "You have your choice of chicken or beans and cornbread." "Yeah, me too. Chicken it is."